Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder. Today we're going to talk about some more of the fun things that Americans did in the 1950s and how they all enjoyed the same things in the suburbs and the same television shows and shopping centers and whatnot in the mass culture of the 1950s. So the 1950s marks a period of changing national distribution. So more than 40 million people moved to the suburbs during 1940 to 1960s. Rural regions suffered a dramatic decline in population, but people also move out of the older industrial cities where a kid could grow up with grass stains on his pants in the suburbs. So during that time, many older industrial cities lost population, but we'll talk about that next time. Today we're going to talk about the suburbs, where new families flock to own their own homes, and one reason that this is caused is because urban housing is lacking, so they move outward. And William Levitt, a home builder who learns how to be efficient from the military in the war, builds the first Levitt town. And a Levitt town is cheap, easily built housing. Here you can see a little Levitt house, just a little box pretty much. But it's cheap, it's easily built. Buyers pay on an installment plan, which means they can pay off their mortgage in about 30 years at about $58 a month. It's affordable and comfortable, perfect for a family that is starting out brand new after the war. The GI Bill of Rights and the Federal Housing Administration make it possible to provide low-interest loans for this housing. And in the suburbs, they basically become their own little cities. They don't have to go back to the large city for pretty much anything. They establish their own churches, schools, fires, and police departments. Fire departments and police departments. They don't establish fires. And the shopping centers built by means that these new suburbanites can buy whatever they want. So the suburbs are becoming increasingly self-contained during this time. In 1956, Eisenhower officially secures funds from Congress to build 41,000 miles of highway. Now, this doesn't occur overnight. This takes many, many years. But here you can see the Interstate Highway map, backed by the American flag because it's patriotic. The multi-lane expressways connect major American cities in the United States. Eisenhower argued that it would safely carry the nation's rising amount of automobile traffic, boost economic prosperity, and become a valuable transportation network for national defense should we need to get forces from one side of the country to the other. The two main effects of this is it made it very easy to live in the suburbs and work in the city because you could just drive on in your car. Although there was public transportation available as well, most people drove in with their car. It also aids the growth of the tourism and travel industries. Everybody packed up the family station wagon and went to Disneyland, or adults went to Las Vegas, which becomes really huge during this time. And they stayed in the new hotels called Holiday Inns, which were hotels along the way that were not crowded, that you could bring a family, and it was very nice. So speaking of cars, we go from 26 million cars in 1945 to 60 million in 1960. These cars are huge, as you can see. People used to make fun of them, call them boats. They're large boats. They have bigger engines and enormous horsepower. Ford, Harley Earl of Ford, adds chrome to his cars to make people think about jets in the future, and it makes them want to buy a car. Different features included power steering, power brakes, and automatic transmissions. So living in the suburbs means driving into the city for work, and it's possible now because you can get an affordable car, and we're dependent on our cars. So businesses begin to cater to people with cars, with drive-throughs, drive-in movies, and shopping malls with acres of parking. You can just see with our own Glenbrook Mall how much parking somebody would need. So consumerism takes hold during the 1950s. We have a lot of money. Our median family income is rising, and so that is the average amount a family makes. It rises from $3,300 to $5,400 during the 1950s. So even though they have more money, a lot of this is on credit. It's easier to buy on credit now because GM comes up with the slogan, "Buy now, pay later." And the Diners Club introduces the first credit card during the 1950s. And what do people buy? Well, they buy stuff for the home. They buy home appliances and brand new televisions, new ranges, refrigerators, and washing machines, lessen physical work for the homemaker. And we'll get to that in a second. And so by 1960, 90% of American homes owned a television. Speaking of family life, most women who worked during World War II returned to being homemakers in the 1950s. And the ideal family was called at the time the nuclear family because of the nuclear influence on the era. The nuclear family was one father, one mother, and children, and that was the family that you were supposed to be. That was the normal family. Women during this time were pushed to accept their roles as homemakers, while men are the one who go off to work in the city and are the breadwinners, or they're the ones that bring home the most money. And television shows and movies reinforce these values, but by the beginning of the 1960s, women aren't satisfied with this life. Who could be? They want to challenge the view that a woman cannot have a career outside the home, so the feminist movement starts by Betty Friedan, and we will get to that as we cover some other topics. Dr. Benjamin Spock, no, not the guy from Star Trek, he writes a popular child care book called Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care, and parents wanted expert advice on how to raise their children. He pretty much became a rich man by saying to nurture them, don't worry about spoiling them because they can never get too much comfort and love. And so the 50s was a very fun decade for children. The book remains popular for decades. It goes through many, many editions, and my own parents raised me on it in the 1980s. Religion. Organized religious groups are becoming more powerful because people are bringing their religion with them to the suburbs, and they're building new houses of worship, and church attendance increases. And evangelist Billy Graham attracted millions to religious revivals he held, becomes very powerful, establishes a university and whatnot. And in the 1950s, Congress officially adds "In God We Trust" to our dollars and "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. And this was to contrast Americans' love of religion with the communists' godless society. So again, it's fighting the Russians by doing this. Jonas Salk during the 1950s invents the polio vaccine. Penicillin and other antibiotics are widely accepted and used, which control diseases such as whooping cough and tuberculosis. So children born after 1946 have a much longer life expectancy compared to children before 1946. Educational changes. Only about 15% of college-aged people attended college in the 1920s. Now 40% do. Large sums of state money are being used to educate this large baby boom generation and guarantee they get at least a 12th grade education by law in most states. After Sputnik was launched, we sort of reorganized our curriculum around science, and we also call for more federal expenditures in education. The California Master Plan creates 3 tiers of higher education, which are research universities, state colleges, and community colleges. And in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, we'll talk more about this next topic, but the Supreme Court rules that segregated schools in the South, black schools, white schools, that's unconstitutional. And America pretty much during this time develops a mass culture where Americans in every region enjoy the same entertainment. On TV, children enjoy the shows Mickey Mouse Club and Howdy Doody. They also watch cartoons and other superheroes like the Lone Ranger. Adults watch shows about families and nuclear families during this time. I Love Lucy is extremely popular. Leave It to Beaver, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best, and The Honeymooners. All of these shows reinforce ideal family values, and there's no African American characters in these shows, and real life problems such as depression, alcoholism, and divorce do not appear. So radio programs, Hollywood films, and TV programs were enjoyed by all Americans. That's all I have for you today about the mass culture of the 1950s. Be sure to fill out those learning targets, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.